These manufactured, these engineered financial catastrophes are the result of a central banking system that has the ability to add and subtract credit, add and subtract dollars and money at will to create this roller coaster effect. Because unlike most people, the banks are able to make profits as easily on the way down as they can on the way up in any given situation. Volatility is great for banks and professionals. Volatility is not great for the most average people.
Their operatives in government and media then hold the economy hostage by issuing the ultimatum: give us unlimited bailout money or the economy dies.
What's being used is what I call, to try to get the money, is what I call the suicide threat, where, you know, if anybody has ever seen the movie Blazing Saddle, the sheriff is surrounded by hostile town folks. He takes out his gun, points it at his head and says, you know, don't move or I'll shoot. Well, that's what the big banks are saying. You know, give us unlimited cash or we'll die. And if we die, you'll die because we're too big to fail.
It is a false flag attack because Hank Paulson will get up in front of Congress and say, we need $700 billion because that thing, that existential threat, the market is attacking us and we need this handout to fight Mr. Market. Mr. Market is out there. We need to fight Mr. Market. It's an existential threat. Meanwhile, he is Mr. Market. He's the one causing the problem.
We had Paulson, a representative of Goldman Sachs who happened to be running the U.S. Treasury, came forward with a hysterical briefing for the Congress saying, we, the Wall Street bankers, demand $700 billion in bailouts.
So they say, yes, we'll give you all the money you need. Well, you know, these are arsonists. Paulson, Tim Geithner, Bernanke, they're arsonists. They're asking for more matches. And the Congress is saying, who do we make the check out to? Who do we send these matches to? Who do we send the matches to? Is a ton of matches enough? Can we send you some gasoline to go with those matches? They're like, yes, please.
Don't change our management. Don't pay us what assets are worth. Pay us way more than what our assets are really worth. Don't make us use honest accounting. Allow us to lie. We've just, under congressional pressure, changed the accounting rules for the express purpose of making sure that the big banks don't have to report honest losses.
The only way they can pass this bill is by creating and sustaining a panic atmosphere. That atmosphere is not justified. Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no. That's what I call fear-mongering.
We have, people in the government threatening martial law or things to get their way in the executive branch against Congress. If you put all these signs together, it doesn't look good at all. To the extent we are a democracy, we're sort of a hairbreadth away from a police state.
Congress aided the bankers in carrying out the biggest heist in history with the so-called banker bailout of 2008.
The bailout money, the $13 trillion or so dollars that have been given to the banks, is sitting on the balance sheet of the banks, and that is incurring interest costs. And that's going to precipitate the need to flush the system with more cash. And at some point, the dam will break, and you're going to have very high inflation. Some predict hyperinflation.
You cannot print phantom money out of thin air, backed by nothing, and producing practically nothing without destroying the world economy.
So unless we cut out the toxic funds, the toxic elements of this economy, every time we put in money on this bailout, it's just feeding the fire. It's not making things better.
What should have happened is that those banks and investment banks should have been seized. They should have been seized by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Those are zombie banks. The Chase Manhattan, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Wachovia, so on down the line, to AIG in the insurance realm. These are zombie institutions, insolvent, bankrupt. The only thing to do with them is to seize them, put them through Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That'll probably turn into Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation. And above all, triage the derivatives on their books. There's no way to bail out a $1.5 quadrillion black hole of derivatives, but nevertheless they tried.
They will, of course, try to regain some of this money back, but their debts, unlike any other period in history, are now a quantum size bigger than the entire global GDP by a factor of 50 to 100. It's almost infinite amount of debt.
If you really look at the numbers, because of the massive, massive debt, and right now, total debt in this country is about 375% of the gross domestic product. And that's not including derivatives. If you put the derivatives in, it's probably 20 to 30 times gross domestic product. It's beyond what anybody has ever even considered.
While they were looting North America into the ground, the international banking syndicate was simultaneously executing the same scam in over 100 other nations.
So who got the money?
To financial institutions in Europe and other countries.
Which ones?
I don't know.
$500 billion and you don't know who got the money?
Well, Obama's got one difficulty with this Congress. It's the number of freshman Democrats that got elected. Many of these people know that they got their seats from, and many of which got seats in the Senate and Congress from long-held Republican seats. They know that the people back in their states and in their constituencies will not tolerate this any longer. So up against the Republicans and the blue dog Democrats are these freshman congressmen, Democratic congressmen and senators, and they're not. They don't seem like they want to go along with the program. So if there's any hope, it'll come from these freshmen.
The Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
This money is not drawn from the Treasury.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you think it's consistent with the spirit of that provision of the Constitution for a group like the FMOC to hand out $500 billion to foreigners without any action by this Congress?
Congress approved it in the Federal Reserve Act.
When was that?
Quite a long time ago. I don't know the exact date.
100 years ago?
The original act is 1914, I believe. I don't know whether this provision was in 1914 or not, but the Federal Reserve Act was in 1913.
All right, and at that time, the entire gross national product of this country was well under $500 billion, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Is it safe to say that nobody in 1913 contemplated that your small little group of people would decide to hand out $500 billion to foreigners?
What the bailout legislation really did was give a blank check backed up by U.S. taxpayers to offshore megabanks.
Of course, Congress has oversight. If you read the Constitution, our founders were very clear. Anything to do with taxes and money is put into the hands of both houses of Congress together. Both houses of Congress together must approve it. Because it's a buck, because that's why we fought the revolution. Taxation without representation was part of it.
Foreign banks, Société Générale of France, about 10 billion for a French bank. Deutsche Bank of Germany.
Did Deutsche Bank need the money? How much did they get from the bailout? Well, they told us they got $12 billion from the bailout.
And Barclays Bank of Britain, $10 billion. So you're up to almost $50 billion to bail out a series of foreign banks that were derivatives counterparties of AIG, plus Goldman Sachs.
This is the biggest swindle, not only in the history of the United States, this is the biggest swindle and transfer of wealth in the history of the Western countries.
And we've seen all these cronies from Wall Street with the combination to the vaults around the country, and they've just looted the Treasury and the banks and the securities industry dry.
This is by probably an order of magnitude the biggest fraud in history.
Over the next 10 months, $23.7 trillion was stolen from the U.S. Treasury.
The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
the tune of $23.7 trillion worth of taxpayer exposure for the bailouts is quite striking.
The calculation right now is that with Obama, we've got $24 trillion as a line of credit available only to Wall Street banks, insurance companies, credit cards, mutual fund companies, and others, but only financial institutions. $24 trillion of money from the Federal Reserve, from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and from the Treasury in the form of the bailout of October 2008.
The Federal Reserve, the private holding company for the offshore banks, arrogantly told Congress and the American people that it was none of their business what the private banks did with the people's money.
One very interesting exchange. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont asking Bernanke, we have given upwards of $2 trillion to various financial institutions. You've got to tell me, where did the money go? And Bernanke simply stonewalls and says, I won't tell you.
And who got the money? Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Tell us who they are.
No.
Do you have to be a large, greedy, reckless financial institution to apply for these monies?
There is no subsidy. There is no capital involved. There is no gift involved. It is a collateralized, short-term liquid loan that is both over-collateralized and is recourse to the company itself. We have never lost a penny doing it.
And how can other institutions get those loans as well?
According to the law, we are supposed to be lending to depository institutions.
Let me just say this, Mr. Chairman. I have a hard time understanding how you have put $2.2 trillion at risk without making those names available, those institutions public. And we're going to introduce legislation today, by the way, to demand that you do that. It is unacceptable to me that that goes on.
Behind me, the Federal Reserve is probably the least transparent agency in the federal government. One could even argue that the Central Intelligence Agency is more transparent than the Federal Reserve.
The fact is that the American people want to know more of the secrets of the temple, as the book was before you were born, The Secrets of the Temple.
The Fed, as you know, is just a monopoly by the bankers. This is simply putting the foxes in charge of the henhouse. Personally, I'd be in favor of Congress just nationalizing the Fed and getting the bankers out of there. They're just stealing from the American people. Put it directly in the hands of Congress and let Congress decide, rather than this cabal of bankers deciding their own rates of profit at the expense of the American people.
Since the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913, patriots have labored tirelessly to alert the American people to the true nature of the Federal Reserve. Throughout its 90-plus-year history, most Americans falsely believed that the Federal Reserve was a government agency. But today, scientific opinion polls show that the vast majority of the public is aware of the fact that the Federal Reserve is a front company for an offshore private banking cartel that dominates not just the United States, but almost every other nation on Earth.
It's never been written about in any book that I've found as to who gave these guys the authority or permission to be the international bankers for the world. Why would you even need international bankers? Why would any government agree to use them? Why would you need to use them? Why can't any country create its own money? It tells you there was already an existing superstructure, already in existence, maybe 200-300 years ago, to give these guys permission to somehow be the overlords of all money for all countries.
Polls also reveal that 75% of Americans demand a public audit of the secretive organization. By the summer of 2009, Congressman Ron Paul's bill to audit the Fed had gained more than 280 sponsors in the House. But the private Fed's high-powered lobbyists were able to block a vote on the bill in the Senate. That only piqued the public's interest.
I have another amendment. I have been informed that the majority plans to block consideration of this amendment, which is number 1367. regarding the transparency at the Federal Reserve. Madam President, I'd like to call up Amendment 1367.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The Senator from South Carolina, Mr. DeMint, proposes amendment number 1367.
Senator from Nebraska.
I make a